All right, and we are live for episode 14 of Comic Convos. Today's guest, we've got John Lees, very good comic book writer in the horror genre. He's got Hotell and Emily Was Gone, and so many other cool ones like Mountainhead. He's got Hotell Volume 2 and Crimson Cage coming out very soon from AWA. So, everyone in the chat right now, please welcome John Lees.
Oh, sorry, I've got an
Hey,
echo going on here. 1 second. I'm trying to think what's happened, where the link's going.
no, you're good. You're in right now. So, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Awesome. So, AWA ended up setting this up between both of us. So I just want to say thank you so much for AWA. And obviously, thank you so much, John Lees, for coming on today. You know, I know
Oh,
your time
thank
is
you for having
very,
me.
oh, of course. I know we got a little time difference going on right now. So, how's it in the UK?
Yeah, no, like it's going all right. Like I've actually got the sun outside my window right now, which is good because you're a nice early call, and all the other American chats I've had recently, like it's been late at night on my end, so I've been kind of sitting in the dark. But yeah, no, since it's nice early morning call for you, it's still the afternoon for me, so I've still got about an hour left of sunlight, so it's not too bad.
Nice. I mean, I'm sure it's probably really nice to have the sunlight out to begin with. I've got a few friends that are stationed over there, and they said it's pretty much cloudy. It's always cloudy.
Yeah, there's a Scottish word called dreich, which is like that describes like miserable, dull weather, and that's just the perfect kind of description for Glasgow most of the time of the year.
So, is that where you grew up? Is that where you've lived most of your life?
Yeah, I come from Glasgow, Scotland.
Nice.
Sunny Glasgow.
So how's it, I know you have all these awesome books coming out and you obviously have been killing it in the horror genre. Is that your main focus? You like to stick to the horror series?
To be honest, like, yes, I do love horror. I don't think it's one of these things I kind of fell into. I never really thought, when I was starting out, like, I'm only going to do horror. Like, like I've tried playing around with other genres. Like, the first ever comic I wrote, The Standard, was a superhero comic. And like I've played around with other genres. Like I did Deepender, which was like a gentle, like romantic comedy, sports comic, which nobody read, So yeah, but so yeah, like I do like to joke in times and say I'm a frustrated like rom-com writer, but no, honestly, like I do love horror. Like I've always loved horror. Like going back to like when I was like a really young kid. Like I've always been kind of obsessed with like all things horror and gory and spooky. I mean, I remember like most kids like my age, back in the day, like, when they were young, would play things like, like soldiers or cops and robbers. But like me and my cousin would play like horrors where we pretend to be like, Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers and like murder invisible people, So, like this is going back to when we were toddlers. So I remember like I had like a local video shop in my street when I was growing up. And like they were probably illegally permissive, and they would like, so I'd walk down to this shop and like I'd just hire like horror movies when I was like 4 or 5 years old. So I'd kind of come home with like Disney's Peter Pan and like Maniac Cop 3 Badge of Silence or something like this. So I've always like had a fondness for horror, and that's kind of carried with me like through into adulthood. And like I think horror comics is like in particular really fascinating because it's challenging to like do horror well in the comics medium, I think. So that kind of challenge makes it kind of enjoyable to kind of try and pursue. And yeah, so yeah, I love horror in all its forms. So I would say that yes, I am a horror writer. To give you a very long answer to your short question.
No, that's good. I mean, you're absolutely killing it in the horror scene. I grew up with a lot of horror stuff too. Like you're saying, I grew up with those movies, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Michael Myers, Halloween, all of that stuff. That's what I've loved growing up. And especially for comic books in general. I mean, there are horror books out there. There's people who try to write scary books, but they don't really capture the like aspect of horror. When you write it, it's when I first read Hotell, I think that's actually one of the first things I've read from AWA. I think it was either that or Year Zero. So I mean, it's two kind of horror ones, but man, just how you captured just the feel of it. It was spooky. It was creepy the entire time I was reading it. For those of you that are going to be watching this, Hotell is kind of more of a nice mix. I'd say kind of like the Twilight Zone, but at the same time, it's sort of Tales from the Crypt. The first time I read that, the first issue of it, I kind of felt like, all right, cool. We've got this hotel manager. He's kind of giving us the little lowdown of what's going on. But then it just goes into the actual character. And I thought, okay, so each issue is going to be a separate character. But no, the way that you tied it all together and then you just told the story from different perspectives, that was incredible. I had to reread it last night to get a refresher because I read it, I think it was last Halloween, and I was like, man, this is insane. I reread it again last night, and it was almost as if I reread it for the first time. Like, you really did kill it on that. So
Well,
when I
thank you very
saw
much.
Hotel Volume 2 was coming, I was so pumped. That was one of the first things I said. It was like, he needs a Volume 2 of this one ASAP. So
Yeah, well,
do you,
that's like, I think a big part of why we're sort of talking here now about Hotel Volume 2 is because of the great response we had. Like, obviously, like, everyone in the team was, like, proud of the work we did on Hotel Volume 1, but I think even so, the response to this book kind of, like, way surpassed even our expectations for it. People like first, like in terms of like sales, I think it was one of like the most successful books in like AWA's like original launch lineup, and the response from like not just retailers but readers like on Twitter and social media, folk really seemed to be really enthusiastic about this book. And like pretty much as soon as like issue 4 had came out from volume 1 and it was completed, we were getting messages like, when's volume 2 happening? Are we getting more? Like, we want to see more Hotel. And like I was getting those messages, AWA was getting those messages, and we knew like that folk would be wanting to read more. Because obviously, like back when I first wrote the first volume, like I was hoping we get to do more. Like I had little breadcrumbs laid down in there and little seeds that I'd kind of planted that I could maybe explore further in future. But it was by no means guaranteed. Like the kind of instructions, like when we ended issue 4, was like end it in a way that like if we don't do any more, it could be taken as like a satisfying ending. Like so we did kind of like we didn't know for sure there was going to be like a volume 2 until we saw the response. Then we thought, yeah, like people are going to want this. So I'm very much happy that we get to come back and tell more. And I think we've topped volume 1 with this volume.
awesome. And I mean, I'm super pumped. When I told my friends that Volume 2 was coming, they were pretty excited too. I mean, obviously, with the comic book realm, there's a lot of people who are speculators. There's a lot of people who try to, they invest in these books in hopes to eventually make money. And that, in my opinion, it screams television. That is an absolute awesome series. I would love to see it on the screen. And what you said, try to create a satisfying ending, but at the same time, leave it open. I felt that out in the last issue. It's like I was satisfied, but at the same time, I absolutely wasn't because I needed another issue immediately.
That's good to know. Like as I say, hopefully, like I do kind of feel like we wrote the first volume in a little bit of a vacuum. Like this time we have expectation because we know there's folk that are really into this, and we can also. I was very conscious of wanting to do something that will kind of reward people for their patience and like their loyalty and their excitement about this book. So yeah, I think like that. Our thinking with this volume is that if you've not read volume 1 of Hotel, if you missed that last year, you can pick up this issue and you'll get a new story and you'll enjoy it. That's the beauty of the anthology format, kind of like these
Cool.
one and done tales. However, if you have been reading from like the beginning, I think you'll find a lot of kind of little hints back to like the previous volume and little like Easter eggs and things that you'll reward that close reading. And hopefully, like you'll be encouraged to maybe revisit some of the old stuff as well.
Cool. So is it going to be kind of set up the same way? If you can talk about that early, where
Yeah,
it's, cool. So it's like each issue is going to be focused on a character, but at the same time, you see all the perspectives from the other characters as well. It
yeah,
falls.
but I'm sorry, you go.
No, I was gonna say, so it kind of follows that same type of format.
Yeah, pretty well. Basically, I think like one thing I was very conscious of is that I didn't want to just repeat myself. Like volume 1 is the story of that one is it's like takes place over like a single weekend, pretty much like a single day, and it's like when this big eclipse is happening in
Mhm.
like the hotel, and it's like you see like the build up to and aftermath of that big kind of event from the perspective of each different person. And there's 4 issues and there's 4 rooms in the hotel, so each issue is like the perspective of a different kind of guest. And like for this one, I didn't want it to be like, oh, here's another eclipse, like so. I thought like so I wanted to try like and play something a bit more ambitious. So this one takes place over the course of like a week. It's like a longer period of time, and it's not like a neat kind of each issue's its own room. Like, there's like some overlap. Like, there's like a couple of like different guests that have occupied the same room at different times. We do a little bit more back and forth, and like the
Cool.
kind of like the overarching story taking place as like an external threat to the hotel, which is gradually getting closer over the course of like the series. But at the same time, we do still have one and done stories where each one is kind of its own self-contained tale. That kind of part stayed true, but I do think this one's a lot bigger and more ambitious. And also, one thing I'm really happy about is that when I first did volume one of Hotell, like I didn't know any of the creative team, like Dalibor Talic, the artist. Obviously, I was aware of his work. And he has some like big credits to his name, but I'd never spoken to him. Like, you know, and even when we were working on the book, I wrote the scripts, sent them to the editor, then the editor sent them to Dalibor, and he drew it, and we didn't really have any direct communication. Like, you know, the team was kind of assigned to me. And like, so, but then like after I'd written the first volume, I went to New York Comic Con in like 2019, and I met Dalibor for the first time, and we got on great. And he's like a lovely guy, like, you know, we had a good rapport. And so now that I know Dalibor, one of the great things about doing volume 2 was I was able to message him before I started and said, what kind of stuff would you like to draw? Like, I want to write things that you'd enjoy doing. So it feels a lot more collaborative this volume as well, which I think is really fun.
That's honestly probably one of the craziest things that I've heard. I was going to ask you what it's kind of like to write a comic book, deal with everybody that's involved with it, but to hear the success from Hotell and how everybody loved it, the fact that you didn't even have communication with him and some of the other team, just kind of said, all right, here's the stuff. And for it to just work that way, that's insane to me. That honestly just makes it that much better, in my opinion. But
yeah, well,
that's really cool.
normally how I'd work. Normally, like, you know, I kind of have the team ahead of time. I'm definitely happier to be in communication with like the rest of the team and stuff. So I'm glad we have that kind of aspect of the relationship now going forward.
I mean, I can only imagine it. That's like doing any sort of project and saying, all right, I did my part, just I guess make it work the best you can. But man,
yeah.
he absolutely killed it with the artwork. That's one of the big things for me is I love a good story, but if the artwork is phenomenal, I can kind of look past a story. But it all just worked so well with each other. And now that you're telling me too that you weren't even in communication, that's yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, after once the pages were coming in, like, you know, after I'd sent my stuff off and like the pages were coming in, I was replying back saying, "Great stuff, Dalibor is looking really good," you know. Like, but yeah, no, it's good to have a kind of closer relationship now.
That's awesome. So, you know, Hotell aside, another massive series. I know this isn't really AWA relating, but we've got Mountainhead. That one, that truly stands out to me as well. You know, the artwork, that artwork, when it flowed with the page, how you're just telling the story with it, that's another one that really stands out to me. How do you, you know, in your opinion, how you feel about Mountainhead? Is that a big one to you?
Oh, I love Mountainhead. For me, like that, when I look at that project, I just think of all the work that went into getting that made. We were with that for a long time. Like, the kind of the original concept, the seed of the idea, was like the premise that kind of starts the story is it's like Abraham is this kid who for his whole life has been kind of like living on the run, looking over his shoulder. Him and his dad kind of live off the grid, with his dad this kind of mad conspiracy type that's you know got convinced that the government are out to get them, and if they ever get caught, they're going to get brainwashed and sucked into like you know the system. And he's becoming kind of increasingly unhinged as they kind of burgle houses to survive. And eventually they get caught by the police, and Abraham finds out that his dad isn't his dad. Actually, he was kidnapped as like a young child, and he's sent back to live with his family who he doesn't remember in his hometown that he doesn't remember. And like, so he has this kind of, and things just aren't right in this place. And he's not sure if like that's down to like, the paranoia that's been instilled in him by his father, or if it's something more. And that kind of premise was in my head for a long time. Like but I didn't really have a full kind of like fleshed out idea. I had that initial premise, but I didn't have a full story. So I kind of went kind of in the bank for years. And then I got talking to Ryan Lee, who is an artist I'm a huge fan of. I'd seen his work on Marvels and Humans at the time and some of his covers, and I thought he was like a fantastic artist. And I met him for the first time at C2E2 in 2016 in Chicago. And the first thing he said to me was, "I want to work with you." And I was like, "Oh my God, Ryan wants to work with me," And like, so he said, "Come up with something for me to draw." And so like, I was thinking about the kind of visuals that he does, kind of like weird, strange stuff, and I came up with like kind of the setting of like the Rocky Mountains and like in the snow and like flashes of red and white, and then some of the crazier stuff that happens in the series later on. But I didn't really have any kind of characters to go with it. And then I kind of thought that old idea I had with Abraham and his dad, and that kind of matched together with kind of the setting, and it all became like one big story. So I talked to Ryan about it, and he loved the idea. And like we set about getting it made, and this was a book that we spent a long time pitching. We pitched to various people, and for one reason or other, it never worked out. And eventually, like IDW, that kind of line of communication opened up. I'd worked with IDW previously doing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but at the time I'd been pitching a different project to them, so I wasn't able to pitch Mountainhead to them. But then things worked out. I was able to pitch Mountainhead, and they loved it, and that was great. So we ended up kind of working with them, and we spent a long time in development with it. And then just as it was starting to get released, the pandemic hit, and that caused like a massive delay, like midway through the run. So we ended up having a really subdued release, like after months of delay. And I think it's kind of a book that went under the radar in a lot of ways, but it seems once it came out collected, a lot of folk discovered it in that format. And like even now, I'm getting a lot of people messaging saying, "Oh, this book's really good," and I'm glad because it's a book I'm really proud of. I think the story is really good. Abraham's one of my favorite characters I've written, but in particular, like the artwork is just stunning. Like Ryan Lee is an artist like nobody else in comics. Every page he does looks like a tableau that you could just put up on your wall as a work of art in itself. And like Doug Garbark's the perfect partner for him on colours, brings out all the details. And then his brother Sean Lee, who's the letterer, is just like a designing genius. He works with me on the letters for Sync as well. And it's not only the letters but the design of the book and the actual physical artifact of the vinyl book itself just looks great, and that's down to Sean. So it's just a great team, I think, and like I'd love to work with that kind of ensemble again in future if I could.
I definitely agree. It is a very complete series between the artwork, the just lettering, everything. It just feels very good when it's in your hands reading it. Now, I don't know if you have plans for a Mountainhead Volume 2 at all, but it was just a nice story. If you ended it the way, I'm not going to spoil it, but if it stays that way, very satisfying. But if you created another volume as well, I'm sure everyone, including myself, would be very psyched for that too. It was
I would say that based on conversations I've had with Ryan, the general feeling we have is that Mountainhead is probably over. We're happy with that story ends, but we'd very much like to kind of do like a story which is kind of like a thematic cousin to it, which kind of works as a follow-up. The kind of like influence that I look at is Alex Cormack and Rich Douek, also IDW, did Road of Bones, then followed that up with Sea of Sorrows, which is like a different story, but kind of like feels in the same spirit. Yep. And I think I'd love to do something like that with like Ryan down the line, like do another book which could maybe touches on similar themes, but is something new.
CSRs is another one that I actually just recently reread again. Another very solid
Such a
series.
good book. It's great. I think
really
Rich has been my friend of mine going back like a decade. Like we both had our first Comic-Con in New York 2011. And that's when we first met, and like we've been following each other's careers. Like we're both in the same writing group. So we can read each other's stuff when it's first made, and so I'm really excited to see how he's been succeeding this year. Conquering Marvel and DC. And and obviously Alex. He's like my artist life partner in comics. We worked on Sync together, Oxymoron, Crimson Cage. So obviously I'm a big fan of him.
So now that you mentioned it. So Crimson Cage, that's going to be your new big one coming out. Obviously, we've been talking about Hotell Volume 2's on the way, but Crimson Cage is going to be a brand new thing coming.
Yep, so the Hotell Volume 2 comes out December 1st, and then 1 week later, December 8th, we have the Crimson Cage issue 1 coming out. So it's like a John Lee's double bill.
I mean, I'm excited about it. For everyone that's tuned in right now, would you care to elaborate on Crimson Cage?
Sure. The Crimson Cage is a retelling of William Shakespeare's Macbeth set against the backdrop of 1980s Southern pro wrestling territories. So it follows the story of Chuck Frenzy, who is the main event star of a small-time Louisiana promotion. He's kind of like a beloved local hero, but a big fish in a small pond. And he's kind of not really happy with his lot in life and where his career's going. And then he has a fateful encounter with some terrifying supernatural creatures in the swamps who tell him that he's destined to become the next world champion and all his dreams are going to come true. And then when the actual world champion comes to his local territory to work a few dates, he suddenly sees that he might have an opportunity here to kind of make that prophecy a reality. But he's going to have to do some terrible things to make that happen. And just in case you don't know what happens in the 400-year-old story of Macbeth, I won't spoil it, but I will say it's not very nice and there's a lot of blood involved.
Well, I'm really excited for, especially, I mean, you've killed it on every horror thing you've written, and for those of you who haven't seen the, comic book cover for that one, it's going to be pretty sweet.
Yeah,
Check out
no,
the
like
previews.
yeah, but one of the things I'm quite excited about is that I've seen some folk talking about, oh, so this one's not really a horror. And I think it absolutely is a horror because, like, I remember studying Macbeth back in school, and like I've loved it ever since then. And why I loved it as a kid is it's like one of the first like horror stories. There's like witches, there's ghosts, there's murder, decapitation, like there's all that stuff in it. Like it's a classic, So it's been interesting to kind of like explore that and go, well, let's see if I can bring out the horror elements and really kind of like foreground just how terrifying this story can be. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, I'm excited for you. I'm excited for it. I know it's going to be awesome. I'm hoping everybody's going to be checking it out too. It's
Yeah,
definitely
no,
going to be
like if
popping
you
up
if
on
you
my.
liked Hotel, if you liked like in my other AWA stuff, if you liked Sync, which I also did with Alex Cormack, the same artist, I think you'll
Sweet.
love this. So please, whether or not you're a fan of wrestling, if you just like good stories, if you like scary stories, please do check it out.
Yeah, chat. He truly does capture the horror element. It you just have this vibe the whole time that something's not right. I'd hate to like circle back onto volume one of Hotel, but it seriously is just the perspectives that you've given of each character. Each issue has this own creepy feel to it. Something weird happens, and in the next issue kind of shows the opposite side of what happened, or not completely, but it focuses on a new character, but something big that happened in another issue. They show something that it may not have exactly been what you're thinking it is. It
Yeah,
really is
that's one of the
solid.
real fun things that to do with the series. Like, now we obviously had this all mapped out, like a big sort of like lots of like post-it notes all spread out. What's the chronology of this series and what's happening when, but it's like little fun things you get to do. Like, for example, in issue one, yeah, the main character's Alice, who's this pregnant woman, who's like on the run from her abusive husband, and at one point in the story, like she bumps into this guy Bobby, who's in room two, and he seems a bit like a sleaze bag, like and he's flirting with her, and then like while he's flirting with her, like the door to his room opens and it's his wife there, and he's all like, oh no, like. And then when you read it in issue one, you think, oh, that's a comedy beat because he's just been busted,
Yep.
like chatting up some women, like like in his wife's there and he's caught him. And then like you read issue two, and you find there's a whole different reason for why he's horrified to see his wife opening the door. There's a lot of fun doing little things like that, like all throughout the series, and thinking how can I like go back to that and revisit it from different angles. I think that's part of like me being such a kind of Kurosawa fan and like loving Rashomon and like wanting to kind of do my own version of that.
I was honestly thinking of that scene and then followed up in issue three. Well, it's still issue one, but when they kind of go through the wall,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, you see the other side of it. Every time I read that, I was like, no way. Even at the end of issue one with the fire, you saw how that got brought into it. I was gonna ask you, how do you like think of something like that? Do you, as a writer, because I'm obviously not creative at all like that, so I would never be able to think of something. But do you circle back a lot? Do you're like, ooh, actually, I'm gonna redo this, and say you're on issue three or four, and you're like, ooh, I'm actually gonna redo that from issue one, so it makes more sense than say issue four. Do you go back and forth a lot?
It's a little bit of a mix, I'd say, with Hotel, especially with Volume One. It was really heavily mapped out. Like literally, I had like like I say, a big bit of paper, and I was like, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and like I wrote down the chronology. And I just like figured out what happened over the course of a weekend in chronological order. Here's everything. Here's when people arrived. Here's when they left. Here's when like the eclipse happens. Here's what's going on. Here's where everyone is. And then from there, like I kind of like picked out like where we'll be seeing in each issue. Like it was a very technical process. I did a little bit of that for volume two, but also with volume two, I allowed myself a little bit of like writing something. And over the course of like, maybe writing issue three, I'll go, oh, that's a neat idea. Why don't I seed something from here back and I can kind of bring up issue one, right? Okay, I'll take this little thing from issue three and slip it in here to foreshadow it. Like, so that's one of the kind of fun things about writing ahead. It's not entirely kind of made up as you go along. You have some flexibility to kind of like play around and kind of go back and seed things in.
That's awesome. I honestly, I would have never thought that someone could write like that, but I guess it does make sense, especially it being a four issue, kind of mini run. Do you prefer to write something like that? Because now you can do something along those lines where you just kind of map it out completely and then, I don't know, cut it off when you're like, all right, that's issue one. We'll just move on to issue two at this spot then.
I mean, it's interesting, like, obviously, like there still happens sometimes, but I for one have never done like a big massive like ongoing series. All my works have been like mini series. Um And even when I've done like longer things, it's been like, a volume, and then there's been like a break, and we've came back for a second volume, like whether that's like Sync or now Hotel.
Mhm.
I kind of think that's kind of the way things are kind of going now with comics. It's very rare to see the kind of like vertigo, like 60 issue, like, run as
Yep.
much these days. It's very much things increasingly seem to be geared towards like miniseries or maxi series at most. So yeah, I think like, obviously there's like some things you lose at that. Like, like sometimes I'll read like a manga, like, like 20th Century Boys or Monsters or a Monster or something. I'm like, oh, I love the luxury of being able to kind of really slowly kind of build something over a long period of time. But on the flip side, I think when you have the more contained, like, limited, like, 5-issue arc, whatever, 6-issue arc, 4-issue arc, it makes you kind of more disciplined, like, where you can't waste any time. You have to think this is the issue where this happens and get right to business. And it makes you kind of become more disciplined as a writer and kind of more ruthless with your pacing.
Cool. So I was even gonna say, so when I first started reading comic books, obviously, everyone when they start reading, they usually hop on Marvel, DC, the big superhero stuff. And when I started reading, as you can tell in the back, I collect a lot of the hardcovers, a lot of omnis. So I was used to a lot of ongoing series. It was all right. Well, now you're on issue 30 of, I don't know, say Amazing Spider-Man. Well, where can I pick it up? And then I started seeing all of these smaller mini series as I started reading more and more, learning about more publishers. I mean, in the beginning, I didn't even know Image and Boom existed. And then I found that there's all these other ones too that create incredible stories. So over the years, I've transitioned from a lot of superhero stuff to pretty much at this point almost strictly indies. And I went from loving ongoings and only wanting ongoings to, in the beginning, I really didn't even like the miniseries. I said, "Oh, I feel like it's kind of a waste of my money. I can just get a trade paperback at some point." But now, when I see a miniseries, it's like, "All right, cool. It's going to be a nice, complete story. They're going to really focus on that. It's not going to be just a bunch of filler issues that are leading up to something massive that might only even be an issue or two." And that's how it is, Hotel. And even a lot of these AWA series, they're incredible. They're absolutely killing it on all of the stuff that they're coming out with. And I mean, Hotel's no different. I know Hotel Volume 2, Crimson Cage is going to be fantastic too. And it's just, it feels so complete and just a nice read.
Yeah, no, like I definitely think like that. Obviously, don't get me wrong, like I love like a big meaty, long-term story. But at the same time, I think like there's like different disciplines. Like something short can have its advantages too. Like for example, like I'm a big Stephen King fan. He's probably my favorite novelist. And probably like like a lot of like my writings like Stephen King fanfic. But like when like you look at his work, like not everything needs to be like the Dark Tower, like in 7 parts. Like he can come in and
Yep.
come in and out right out away, do something like The Shining or Salem's Lot, which is like a self-contained story and it's done. And like and it's not lesser for that. Like like it's kind of its own thing, and it has being its own kind of like contained thing has its advantages too. It makes it easier to revisit. I can read it in its entirety than if you have to go and read like a whole run. So yeah, I definitely think that sort of more kind of mini series format does have its advantages. Having said that, like Sync, like something like Sync, like obviously there's been a bit like there's been gaps between volumes, but 10 issues of that been published, and I've written like another 10. And that's kind of like pretty much qualifying for an ongoing now. And having that kind of format that is a fun thing to play with as well. Kind of like, and when things start to kind of come to a conclusion or like, things come together, there's that kind of reward because you've been waiting for it and it's been slowly building up. So both formats have their own advantages, I think.
I agree. They definitely do. I mean, some people, they really like their ongoings. They like to see how things evolve over the course of a few years. I mean, the Immortal Hulk just ended. That was 50 issues, and to see how that started to how it finished. Same with the Amazing Spider-Man. That just finished a 75 issue mini run, or that's definitely not a mini run.
Big
It's a big mini run. But it's cool to see how things start. Amazing Spider-Man, they started off, they had Kindred, the new villain, in the very beginning, and they kept him until the very end of it, but he's evolved over the course of those issues. You saw Bruce Banner, the Immortal Hulk, that evolved over the series as well. So that is cool. But I mean, everyone that's in the chat right now, I'll tell you, just mini series and just the maxi runs, man, they're really coming along. They've really evolved, even just in the last year. I don't know if maybe COVID helped and people were able to take a little break. They were able to focus and then come out with all
Well, I
this
know I
stuff.
read so many comics during COVID. Like, I read
I
so
read a
much
lot
stuff
too.
that year. I think that kind of dopamine hit of getting like comics in your like letterbox is what replaced like social interaction.
It's yeah, I mean, once COVID hit, they stopped coming out with all of new stuff, and I was like, all right, cool. Now I can, get caught up on some of my stuff. I mean, I got 8 volumes of Berserk back there, and I think I read the first 5 and maybe the first few days. I bought them all pretty much right at once, and I was like, wow, this is insane.
Yeah, no, I was the same. I really get into manga during like lockdown. Like Naoki Urasawa, who's like probably one of my favorite writers now. I hadn't even heard of him before like 2020, but like a bunch of my friends said you should pick up 20th Century Boys, which I did, and I read all that, thought it was excellent. Then I picked up Monster, read all that, thought it was excellent. Read all of Pluto, and Master Keaton is what I'm on now. So yeah, like I've definitely devoured a whole lot of like stuff like I would have might not have otherwise read. So yeah, there's definitely advantages.
I'm gonna message you on Instagram. I'm gonna get your manga, the stuff you like, because I mean, as you can tell, I've got Berserk back there. I'm kind of almost finished with was it the Death Note? That one's absolutely dragging. But I mean, those are just so popular mainstream. I started reading Attack on Titan. Well, a little bit. I was watching that, but I need, the good ones that people, the real manga fans know.
No, we need to get you on some Junji Ito. Like that's like a big inspiration for me. So
Was that did he do the oh my gosh.
Uzumaki is his big one.
Yes, I read
Yeah,
that. That's the one I read. That's what someone referenced to me. That is a very creepy book.
yeah.
Very
I like
weird.
scared the crap out of me when I first read it.
It started off I think the ending was a little, I don't know, kind of, there's some comedy spots in that too,
Yeah, no,
but
that's the thing we don't realize that like it's actually very funny in some places as well. With this, Junji Ito's work. He's definitely a lot of the stuff is played for laughs.
like people turning in the snails, the mosquitoes, that whole little chapter. Yeah, very weird stuff. And it's like I'm like reading it like, do I laugh? Should I be weirded out? What am I doing right
It's
now?
interesting because like most obviously like Uzumaki's probably his like longest work. Most of the stuff he does is like little short stories, like like he'll release an anthology just of like little like 30-page like standalone tales. And that's his kind of preferred format. And the endings are often so like weird, like like we're so used to like dramatic endings, and like his stories are always kind of like narrated by somebody. Like, I remember when this happened, and then like it'll end like like so you have some horrific ghost or ghoul showing up or some flesh melting monster, and then like the character like, yeah, so that happened a few summers ago. That was pretty weird. And then like that, I just like like this happened to my mate Vince, so but yeah, like and like I'd really love to explore that format as well. I think like like one of my like dream projects I'd love to do someday is to like release like a big book of like sort of just like 10 to 12 like 30-page like short stories, all kind of like spooky horror themed. I think that'd be a lot of fun to do someday. So I'll put that on the bucket list.
I was gonna say definitely get on that. I mean, I would definitely be all about it. I mean, everything that you've written so far that I've read, I've been a huge fan of. And if you would release, long short stories like that, I mean, that'd be pretty sweet too. But as far as a writer goes, is this something that you thought that you would do later in life? Is this something that you've always wanted to do?
Yeah, like I've always wanted to write. I don't think I've always wanted to write comics. I back when I was like a young kid, like I always wanted to be an author. And I always loved comics from a young age as well. I don't think I ever really put two and two together that you could write comics, But then, like, it was actually back in 2008 now, I think. I just graduated from university, and a friend of mine wanted to draw a comic. They were an artist, and they asked me if I would write the script for them. So I thought, well, I'll look into how you write a comic script. And I became fascinated by the format. I love the limitations of it. I love the structure. And I love that like there's still like untapped potential there. There's like things that haven't been done yet in the comics medium. I think like there's still potential to kind of break new grounds. I thought it was really exciting. So I wrote a script, which became the standard, my first superhero comic. And it was totally different from what my artist friend actually wanted to do. And I'm like, no, that's all right. Just go and do it your own. It's fine. So the rest is history for there. And I've just been chasing it ever since. And yeah, no, like so, like absolutely love writing comics. I'm not counting out writing for other mediums in the future. But for now, I'm very happy working in comics. I think I've got a lot more to do in the comics medium. So yeah, that's me for now.
Cool. Well, I mean, I'm extremely excited to see what else you can do too. So, as far as even writing goes, obviously, AWA, you've written for IDW. Um, how do you feel about writing? I mean, anything negative, you don't have to talk about that stuff, but how's it been, writing for some of these companies? Do you feel that you have a lot of freedom? Because I know I've talked to some people that have been kind of with Marvel, and, obviously with Marvel, DC, companies like that, you really have to focus on, kind of the character, some deadlines, and just stories that might go into other stories as well. Do you feel that with some of these companies, like the indie companies, you can, you have the freedom to do exactly what you want?
Yeah, and obviously you have different working relationship with every publisher. I did like when you said don't see it negative. Like, oh no, I can't reveal the cult rituals that I noticed were going on when I walked into the offices last time. But not yeah, for example, Comics Tribe, who did all my early books, like The Standard and Emily Was Gone, who I still do sync with. With them, it's almost totally hands off, total creative control. Tyler's the editor there, and he'll come with some suggestions and things, But for the most part, he's you go do your thing, and I'll support it. With IDW, I first worked with them doing a Turtles comic, and that was a little bit of an experience, doing the work for hire, not, a kind of similar to doing something for Marvel DC, I'd imagine, where you're not just surfacing the story, you're surfacing the wider continuity. So, for example, at the time, when I first wrote the script, it was in the IDW comics series at the time, Michelangelo had split away from the other Turtles and he was living on his own. So the story was kind of revolving around that. And it was Michelangelo is kind of living on his own. He's isolated from his family and he's vulnerable to this new threat that's coming. And once I'd written that, the editor, Bobby Colonel, was this is really good. However, by the time this comes out, Michelangelo's going to be back with the rest of the Turtles again. So, we're going to have to change it, So, all right, okay. And then, it's even little things you obviously have as well as kind of story notes, you have continuity notes, you have someone who's on hand to say, well, actually in issue 30 something this happened, it contradicts that, so can you change this? And actually again I enjoyed the challenge of it. It's an interesting thing to kind of work with, servicing those kind of other needs and kind of playing in a larger shared sandbox. But when I worked with IDW on Mountainhead, again, I felt I had a lot of kind of freedom. The main notes I kind of got from Mountainhead was American spelling. I think I wrote pajamas. I spelled in the script, I wrote pajamas with a Y, Pyjamas. And in America it's called pajamas, Pajamas. What? Little things like that. AWA have a great editorial team. Obviously, Axel's the editor-in-chief and has he's the person that makes the big decisions. But I think a lot of credit has to go to the whole staff, the work, Michael Coast, Dulce Montoya, Thea Chuk, and they're really kind of on the ball, and they've had some really good notes, really constructive things, and they're really hands-on, and they'll come up with ideas that kind of make you go, oh, that's really good. And it's actually quite a fun part of the process, being able to have someone to kind of riff off of and say, oh, why don't we try doing this? And or even simple stuff like having a team of folk to kind of proofread and pick up typos and lettering issues and things rather than just me on my own doing it. So yeah, and I definitely think that kind of collaborative thing can be a lot of fun.
Cool. And that's really awesome to hear your side of things, because recently I had on, I'm not sure if you know who he is, Andrea Molinari from Scout Comics. He's one of the head editors. I recently had him on. So I got the whole breakdown, Chat got the breakdown of what it's like being an editor. So now a week later, we got the writer on. So it's cool to hear how he, kind of talks to his writers and how you're talking about, dealing with editors and everybody else. And it's really awesome to see how, AWA, IDW, and then Scout, they really like to work together as a whole team. It's not, I'm the boss or I'm the writer, I'm dictating this. It's all right, cool. You got an idea, bounce it off me. I got an idea. I'm going to, tell you what I think, and we're going to go from there. So it's really cool to hear that dynamic from everybody, especially amongst different companies, and that they're kind of all on the same page.
I don't think anybody wants to make a bad comic. I think everybody's on the same page in that sense. They're all trying to make the best book we can. So even if there are disagreements, or people have a different vision about how to do that, I think we're all ultimately working towards the same goal, which helps a lot.
So I guess my question to you is, say, you have this idea, or you've already written a few issues and now you have the next one that needs to come out, and the editor says, I don't think this is good, or I think you should change this. Where does that come down to, the difference of positions? Can you go back to that editor and say, you know what, no, I think I'm going to keep it this way? Or how does that dynamic work?
I mean, I think hypothetically, in terms of I would say that if you're writing, if you've written a few issues or something already, by that point, something would have been caught, because usually I'm submitting things like an issue at a time, so it would probably be if I'd written issue, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and issue 5, someone's saying actually change something from issue 1, I'd be a bit worried, but yeah, no, generally speaking, I think it's I kind of obviously when people are giving I think you have to have that confidence to be able to say well, I don't agree with this and here's why. However, I think as a writer, you have to make sure that you know why you're disagreeing with something. It can't just be I want it this way, and that's why it has to be this way. I think, it's okay to disagree with a note or say, well, I think it should be this, but then you have to think, well, why are you saying this? Are you saying this because it's genuinely for the best of the story, or is it just because you don't want to change it? So I think it's a good process to kind of have that critical thought about your own work and be able to kind of um, even not just for editing, I work in some writing groups as well. I have various writing groups that I'm a part of, and I always say as well that when people are giving you notes in a writing group, you don't have to take on board every single note you're given.
Mhm.
However, you do have to take every note seriously, and if you're not going to take on a note, you have to think, well, why am I not taking on that note? Is it because of something in the story? Do I know something about this story that they don't? And it makes you the whole process of having to justify your creative decisions and kind of argue them and fight their case does inform you a lot about just how important they are, and kind of helps to kind of clarify what is really important in your story. So I think that's a kind of useful part of the process as well.
Cool. Is that a common practice, kind of having writing groups where, you sit down with a bunch? I'm guessing it's sitting down with a bunch of people, or maybe it's an online forum and you just
And these days it's online because of the pandemic and all. But I'm not sure how common it is. I definitely think it should be more common. I think that for me, writing is often a solitary pursuit. You're writing something and either it gets eventually published or it's just going off into a black hole.
Mhm.
It's easy going to get caught up in your own head. So I think that, going back for a decade now, I think it was 2011 when I first launched the Glasgow League of Writers, or GLOW, which is a Glasgow-based writing group. I think the whole process of writing for a writing group is invaluable in multiple ways. One, it gives you that kind of feedback where you get someone outside of yourself gets to see the work and judge it and give you a perspective that you may not have otherwise had. So that's valuable. Two, it gives you a deadline to work towards. If a book's not been published, or if it's not been picked up by an editor, there's no real impetus to write. Sometimes you can lose your motivation. But if I'm thinking I need to get this written for the next writing group at the end of the month, that can be a motivator to get more stuff written and be more productive. And also, I think it's just great to be around people who are doing the same thing you are. I think it really I always come out of these meetings really creatively energized and inspired, seeing that other people working on similar stuff to me are doing the same things. And I've just found some great friends from doing it. I didn't really have much of a social circle a decade ago, but through getting into meeting writers and meeting other comics creators, people who have the same values and same kind of experiences as me. I think it's really been invaluable in that sense. Just building up some great friends, and it's been a great social network too.
That's awesome. And to hear, all the positives come out of, these writing groups. Now, just to play devil's advocate real quick, I'm guessing these people that you're in with, they're close friends or people that you can trust. Do you think something like this, people could run into a potential of someone maybe taking an idea, or if you say, "Hey, I like this," or "I'm going to do this," you think there's people out there that could jump the gun and take that idea and run with it first and say, oh no, this was my idea? Do you think people would run into problems like that?
Well, to be honest, I mean, yeah, whenever I submit, something in, the writing group, technically every time I submit a script, you could be thinking, oh yeah, someone could, lift this script from, the inbox and take it as their own. But I don't really worry about that because, one, I think ideas are cheap. If I say, oh, I've got an idea to do a wrestling comic that's like an adaptation of Shakespeare, or I've got an idea to do a comic about, this demon that's stealing missing kids in the Scottish Island. The idea isn't that special. It's how you do the idea. So, one, if someone read, someone I don't know, someone read and Emily Was Gone and thought, oh, I want to do my version of it and Emily Was Gone. I think just the act of them doing it would make it different. And also, I think that I have seen that at times when, folk have said, oh, I don't want to submit anything to this writing group because I think people would steal my idea. And generally, and this is maybe isn't an absolute thing, but in my experience, the kind of people who say that kind of stuff aren't the kind of people who are actually ever going to make their comic anyway. So I kind of feel that the very process of making comics, or making any kind of stories really involves putting yourself out there and putting your ideas out there a little bit, and also just trusting that. Trusting enough in your own ability to tell a story that it's not the idea that makes it special, it's you telling it that makes it special. If I were to do a comic about some immortal being that lives in the dream dimension, it would probably be very different from Neil Gaiman's take on the Sandman. So yeah, the idea isn't what's special. It's you and your creativity, and it's a lot harder to steal that than it is to steal an idea. So I wouldn't worry about it. I would say don't hold off on sharing your stuff for fear of it being stolen. Because one, it's not likely to happen, and also two, it's a wrong mentality to take.
That is honestly an incredible answer. Just, you could have an idea and then someone could take that idea, but it's your plan and your idea that's going to make it special. And just them taking it doesn't mean anything. I really like that. So with the writing groups, that's really cool that you found, a positive space where you can bounce ideas off each other and you can roll with it. Now, as far as, not really going back to your first published comic, but I know on AWA, I believe it's Scout and a few other publishers, they have a thing at the bottom of their page that says submit a comic idea or, submit something. I've talked to Andrea Molinari about how that process goes. They usually like something a little complete. But now, as far as where you're at right now, do you need to go through that same process to an extent, or you just kind of send a text to someone or an email and say, hey, I got this idea? Is it a little bit simpler for you because you're a little bit more established?
It's been a long process. I've gone through I think pitching is one of the hardest things you can do. Writing the comic is easy, pitching it is hard. I mean, I've always said if you've listened to me in an interview before, you've probably heard this analogy already since I use it all the time. But I always say that if making a comic is like having a baby. It's you take a part of yourself and put it into something else that's new and you love it and you're proud of it and you do anything for it, and it fills your heart with joy. Pitching a comic is like taking that baby and putting it inside a hamster wheel and rolling it down the motorway and hoping it gets to the other side intact. It's suddenly you're being bombarded with people who don't care about the thing the way you do, or telling you why it's wrong or why it's not good enough. It can crush your confidence, and it definitely has crushed mine at the time. And I do think it's got easier. I remember back when I first started out, my general experience of trying to pitch was sending stuff to editors or going to conventions and talking to editors and maybe getting their card, and then I'd email them after the show and just never get a reply. And that's kind of the experience for a lot of creatives, I think. I think it's easier if you have a finished book. I think if you if you're able to set aside a budget and make your own book, even if it's only kind of one shot, having something concrete that you can say this is what I do is going to be a lot easier than just kind of going up to somebody and going, here's my idea. I remember at one point, I met somebody at a show who just gave me a kind of stapled together like document with like, you know, the written down idea for a story, and like, you know, and like I said, I can't do anything with that. I don't work for anybody. Why are you giving it to me? You know, you know, but I think a lot of folk like, you know, maybe have that mentality of like just get my stuff out there. But I definitely think it helps a lot if you have like your own thing made. But even if you do, when you're starting out, it's not easy to get attention, because if you think about it, every indie publisher is working on a tight margin. They have their own kind of like roster of books set for the next year, the next 2 years. So if you're coming to them, it's like you're having to say to them, why is your comic better than the people that they already enjoy working with, that they already have an established relationship? Why should they set aside that to focus on you and the thing, you know, they don't know about? I think so. It's definitely a big uphill struggle to kind of get noticed when you're first starting out. I was fortunate with Comics Tribe that, like, you know, I knew like some of the people involved in that when I started out. Like Stephen Forbes was the editor on the Standard, and he was one of the kind of founding members of Comics Tribe, and he introduced me to Tyler, so I had that kind of in, which was really thankful. But yeah, no, in terms of like, as the years have gone on, like obviously when I did like An Emily Was Gone, that got a little bit of buzz and a little bit of attention. It's always like when you're able to say, I'm the guy who did this, that's a lot easier than just being like, you know, walking up to people at a show. So when I did Emily's Gone, that got my name out there a bit. And I did Sync, that got my name out there a bit. And eventually, like, I like to joke around and say that I knew I'd made like big headway as a creator when editors had to actually start replying to me to say no, as opposed to just like ignoring me. Like that, but you know, and like, so yeah, like it's a bit of a bummer getting a rejection, but even getting a rejection from somebody is suddenly like, wow, that feels great. You know, I exist, you know, and I haven't actually, you know, messaged me back. But something as well I've noticed is that I've had, as things have gone on, I've became like a bit of a bigger name and I'm more of a known commodity. I've had to do a little less work like than I used to do. Like in the past, when I was trying to like messaging editors pretty much cold, I'd have to kind of like get together a creative team, and then we'd have to put together a sample pages and have to pay to kind of put together a pitch package. It was a kind of like, you know, a big kind of like commitment. It's one of these things where like you'd have to make the judgment of, do I try and like pay to make like 2 or 3 pitches, or do I just pay to make my own comic and release it myself? And so like I was kind of making these big commitments, and then when the editors didn't reply, or they said no, or they gave it a form rejection, it was really demoralizing. And yeah, sometimes I still do have to put together pitch packages, but increasingly now, as I get to know editors and editors get to know me and my work, I found that instead I'll maybe get a message saying, just send us like, you know, a Word document with your idea. Send us some ideas and then we'll see what we like, you know, which is a lot easier to do. Like, you know, then it's like, it's a lot less pressure. Like, you know, that only happens after years of groundwork and years of like, you know, proving that you can make books and like, you know, that you're good for it, you know, so it takes a long kind of time to get to that level. Like I've been doing this for a decade, and I only feel now I'm at the point now where like people like are actually interested in hearing from me and know who I am when I message them. So yeah, it's a long process. Like I say, it gets easier as you go along. But even so, even though I've had a few books under my belt, even though I think people know who I am, you know, to a certain extent, still overwhelmingly I have like a lot more rejections than I have acceptances. I'm still getting told no all the time. So, and I'm sure like even like, I don't know, Donny Cates, you know, I'm sure he still gets told no from occasion. Like, everybody, no matter how high you get up, you know, has like stuff that they'd like to do but aren't able to do yet, and are striving to kind of get to that level of being able to get more stuff made.
I'll tell you, only because you mentioned Donny Cates, that man's got his hand everywhere right now. You know, he finished up with Venom. He's going to be writing the Hulk. He's got crossover. I think he still has Redneck going on.
Yeah,
he's got a lot happening.
He has one of the things, and I think I mentioned this at the time back when the race started first breaking out, is when you saw a lot, like back when he was getting like a bunch of his like, you know, new, it seemed like every week there was a new Donny Cates book getting announced. A lot of that stuff that was getting announced was like older stuff that he had been like pitching around for ages, or like things that he'd released on his own. That's one of the kind of like encouraging things, that even if something isn't like, even if like people aren't ready for your idea like today, maybe tomorrow, like, you know, when you've got a big breakout hit, you know, at the image or whatever, they'll suddenly be more receptive to those ideas.
So that's probably how that worked. He's got a nice backlog of stuff already completed, and now all of a sudden ready for it.
Every creator, I think I saw a tweet recently that said every comic creator has like a story graveyard, where like, you know, ideas that they wanted to do and never got a chance to make. Like, and I've always said that, like, you know, if like, what's one of the kind of sad things where like, if the story of my life is like, you know, my comics work, let's say, like, you know, it's missing like whole chapters. Like times when I spent a year working on a book that never got made, never saw the light of day. And I'm sure every creator has similar stories.
Awesome. So we're coming up on the 55-minute mark. I tend to, I know you're a very busy man, and I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sit down and talk with me in the chat. Last 5 minutes, I'd like to ask anybody, if you have any questions, now's the time. Any questions about his work, things he's done, we did cover a lot today, but I'm sure there's some other questions out there as well. But
hit me up.
Yeah,
like I say, things he's done as if he wants to question about his many crimes. Things he's done.
The many crimes of John Lee's.
Where are the bodies buried?
That's the next horror story. It's actually based on a true story. Different name.
This is a true story.
So if there's nothing that comes up, I do have a final question for you. Of all the things that you have done, what is your favorite story that you've written? Which one to you is your, this is my baby. I love this, and I'm so happy to see it grow the way it has.
Well, that's. I think that funny enough. I think Matt S just popped up in the comments with a very similar question.
Yeah,
so I'll maybe I'll answer you both at once, and I would say it's a little bit of a cop-out answer, but I do love all of my comics. I've always said that every comic that I write, I want to be somebody's favorite book. If you're not writing a book thinking this could potentially be someone's all-time favorite comic, then why are you writing it? If you don't feel that way about it. But having said that, Sink is a comic that's very close to my heart. It's based in Glasgow. It's kind of set up in a hard-boiled, crime tale set in my home city. So it's a book that's I've wanted to do for a long time. Like I say, it's my longest running book. I've written 10 issues of it with another couple of volumes on the way. I've got a new Kickstarter coming out, Dig, which is set in the Sink universe. That's going to be launching this month. So watch the space for that. So that's a series I'm really kind of proud of. And then for a while, issue 10 of Sink, which is again a totally oddball, bizarre, comedy issue, was my favorite thing that I'd ever written that had been published. And I thought, I wrote that, and I read the final issue, and I read it on the shelves, and I thought, that's it. This is my best comic. But having said that, now I read The Crimson Cage, and I've been looking at the print proofs of that and seeing Alex's artwork and Ashley's colours, Ashley Cormack, Alex Cormack's wife, and Hassan Otsman Elhouse, the letterer, and I've seen his final work, and I've reading this and going, I think this might be the best thing I've ever written. It's just really one of these things where I read it, I know that kind of gif of Antonio Banderas, and he's that's been me every time I finish reading my own comics, you're so good, John, it's just rare for me to have that, but yes, I've really been proud of that work, and I kind of feel that that's maybe the right mentality I have. I think your favourite work should always be the thing you've got coming next. If you're
cool.
Looking back in the glory days of what came before, then you're kind of dead as a writer. So I'd say and maybe the thing that I have, maybe whatever I have coming up in the future after Crimson Cage, that'll be my new favourite thing. But for now, I would say of my currently released books, Sink is my favourite, but my upcoming ones are should be my next favorite. So make sure you check them out.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And then we got
that's what any advice for someone who can't draw but wants to tell stories.
Yes.
Well, I would say one of the great things about I can't draw. If you've seen if you look at my terrific drawings, actually one of the issues of Sink, there's a backup story where Alex Cormack wrote it and I drew it, and it looks like a dog's dinner. But yeah, so I can't draw, but I would say that's the beauty of collaboration. One of the fun things about making comics is working with other people. And for me, I've always said that one of the real the only thing that's better than getting a page in from an artist, and it's exactly how you imagined it, is getting a page in from an artist and it's totally different from how you imagined it, but they've made it even better. So yeah, I think that's for example, I'm sure that there's directors out there who can act and handle lighting rigs and everything. The process of creation is collaboration and working with other people. And I think it's kind of beautiful that when me and Alex come together, for example, or me and Ian Laurie, or me and Ryan Lee, or me and Dalibor, that pairing creates something new. It's a chemical reaction where we'll create something that's not like anything else that I would do with another writer, or I would do with another artist. I think that kind of symbiosis, is kind of beautiful, and I really love collaborating with other people. So I would say if you're someone who can't draw but wants to make comics in particular, I would say, start like going to like social events, going to cons, hitting up, connecting with artists, meeting creative people, and yeah, start building those relationships. Or if you want to do something that's not comics, like if you just want to write, like then write, like but it's never been easier to kind of like write stuff and put it out there, and like and have like a platform and an audience, like even if it's just writing for yourself at first, like but I'd encourage anybody who wants to be creative and tell stories and write to try doing it.
So this is going to kind of play off of that question as well. Um, so would you say you're, since we are just talking about it too, someone who's interested in submitting a comic book at this day and age, do you think it would be better for someone to not just submit an idea or a plan, but to kind of have your own team already prepared? Like the book is not the whole book, but a couple issues are written, they're kind of complete. And you think that would be the better submission than just an
Oh,
idea?
one first thing I would say is make sure you look at any company's submission guidelines, because sometimes if you don't follow the guidelines and do more or less than what they want, actually automatically disqualified.
Mm,
So I would say one, I mean, as a general rule of thumb, if you're putting together a pitch package, as I say, it can vary from publisher to publisher, but I think it definitely helps if you have an artist and a creative team on board. If you have like a synopsis, you write down what the whole series is going to be. Like for like not just like describing like what happens, but like describing what it's about. I'm trying to kind of, and that's an art form in itself, writing a good pitch. And then in terms of like what you create, I would say at least maybe like a sample, like I write a sample scene of like 5 to 8 pages, get them drawn up, so that an editor can look at that and have an idea what the book's going to feel like, what it's going to be like. So yeah, if you have a specific pitch that you are wanting to make, like I would say, it definitely puts you a stronger position to have a creative team in place and to be able to sort of like show the editor, because especially if they don't know you and you're kind of going in cold, the
mhm.
best thing you can do is like show them your work and let them know your work. Other than that, if you're just wanting to generally build relationships with editors, like something that I find is quite useful, that I found has helped a lot, is if you're making a book on your own, if you're self-publishing a book for releasing at conventions or whatever, or if you have a book with like a small publisher, I would say contact editors and say, here's a book that I've got coming out. Not as I'm pitching it to them, but here's a book that I've got coming out. Here's a PDF of it, just so you can, would it be okay if I keep in touch with you about like my work that's coming up and like send you stuff like as I make it, and that in itself can build up a relationship with an editor. Like if you're not immediately going in and asking them like for a job, if you're just saying this is me, this is what I do. And not every editor is going to reply to you. Some are going to be too busy, but some are going to be like, yeah, I'm interested in seeing what you're making. Like, that builds up a relationship. Maybe down the line, maybe it's months later, maybe even years later, maybe they're like, thinking about, oh, I need someone to do something. Or there's this guy here that I know, like, so something like that can pay off as well.
Awesome. Thank you for all the info. Chat, thank you for hanging out today. It really does mean a lot that you took the time out of your day to come hang out with me and, tell everybody all this info. But seriously, this was an awesome conversation. I had a great time talking with you. He's got so much cool stuff coming out too. We talked about Hotell Volume 2. We got Crimson Cage. All of the links are down low in the description. If you're a big horror fan, if you're not a horror fan, still check it out, because it's not like super scary, but it just has this vibe that just it pulls you in. And seriously, everything's down low. Go follow him on Instagram. Check him out on AWA. He's got trade paperbacks as well. And like I said, thank you so much for taking the time out of your
Thank you
day.
very much for having me on. I had a great time chatting.
Awesome. And thank you again, everybody, and have a nice day.
Bye.